Thomas lay on the cold hospital floor, gasping for air. His chest felt tight, like something was crushing him from inside. Sweat poured down his face. His servants screamed and ran around in panic. Nobody knew what to do. Thomas was a powerful landlord. He owned many houses. People feared him. But now, he couldn't even breathe properly. His driver quickly carried him to the car. They rushed to the city hospital. The servants called the best doctors. Everyone was afraid. What if Thomas died? Within minutes, the hospital was filled with noise. Doctors ran into the emergency room. Nurses pushed machines. Then one young doctor walked in slowly. He looked at the patient's name on the chart. His hands began to shake. His face went pale. He whispered under his breath, "Not him. Please, not him." Nobody heard him. The machines beeped louder. Thomas was dying. The young doctor stood frozen at the door. His name was Frank. He stared at the dying man on the bed. Thomas was choking, struggling to survive. Frank's mind was racing. Memories flooded back like a storm. He remembered everything. The pain. The hunger. The shame. Frank whispered to himself, if only he knew. If only he knew that the boy he once destroyed now holds his life in his hands. The nurses called Frank urgently. But he didn't move. He was remembering something from many years ago. A time when he was just a small boy. A time when his mother was still alive. A time when they had nothing. Frank closed his eyes. The story began to rewind. He saw himself as a child again. Standing beside his mother at a tall iron gate. They were poor. They were desperate. And they were about to meet Thomas. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this story from. Many years earlier, Frank was only 8 years old. His mother's name was Faith. She was a widow. Frank's father had died 2 years before. They had no money. No home. No family to help them. Faith heard that Thomas owned many rooms for rent. People said he was kind. So one morning, Faith took Frank's hand. They walked to Thomas's big compound. The iron gate was tall and shiny. Faith knocked softly. Thomas opened the gate himself. He smiled warmly. "Good morning, madam. How can I help you?" Faith explained that she needed a place to stay. Thomas listened carefully. Then he said loudly, "You and your son are welcome here. I will give you a room." Neighbors watched and clapped. Everyone praised Thomas. "What a good man," they said. Faith cried with joy. She thanked him over and over. Thomas smiled wide. But when the gate closed behind them, his smile disappeared completely. Faith couldn't stop thanking Thomas. She bowed many times. Frank stood beside her quietly. He was a smart boy. His eyes were sharp and curious. Thomas noticed this. He didn't like it. Frank looked too confident for a poor boy. Thomas showed them to a tiny room at the back of the compound. It was dark and smelled bad. But Faith was grateful. "Thank you, sir. God bless you," she said. Thomas nodded, but his face was cold now. That night, Faith cooked a small meal with the little food they had. Frank studied by candlelight. He wanted to go to school. He wanted to be somebody important one day. Faith smiled at him with pride. Outside, Thomas watched them through the window. He saw Frank reading. He saw Faith's hope. It annoyed him deeply. He muttered under his breath, "I will remind them who owns this place. They will learn to fear me." 2 weeks passed. Faith worked hard cleaning people's houses. She saved every coin to pay rent. Then one morning, Thomas knocked on their door. Faith opened it quickly. "Good morning, sir." Thomas didn't smile. The rent is now double, he said coldly. Faith's mouth opened in shock. But sir, you said, Thomas cut her off. Things have changed. Pay by tomorrow or leave. Faith's hands shook. She didn't have that much money. Please sir, give me more time. I will find a way. Thomas laughed. Time. I gave you shelter. Now you want time too. Frank stood behind his mother. He looked at Thomas with steady eyes. Thomas felt uncomfortable under the boy's gaze. Pay tomorrow, he said firmly, then walked away. Faith fell to her knees outside their door. Neighbors watched but said nothing. Frank held his mother's hand tightly. His heart was burning with anger. Faith tried everything to get money. She begged. She borrowed. But she couldn't find enough. Thomas knew this. He told all the tenants, nobody should help that widow. If you do, you will also leave my compound. People were afraid of Thomas. So nobody gave Faith food. Days passed. Frank and his mother grew weaker. They only ate once a day. Sometimes not at all. One evening, Frank saw another tenant throw away leftover food. He waited until it was dark. Then he quietly took the scraps from the garbage. He washed them and brought them to his mother. Faith cried when she saw what he did. My son, forgive me, she whispered. But Frank smiled. We will survive, Mama. The next morning, Thomas caught Frank taking food from the trash. His face twisted with anger. So you're a beggar now, he shouted. Everyone in the compound stopped to watch. Thomas grabbed Frank by the arm. He dragged him to the center of the compound. Everyone gathered around. This boy is a thief, Thomas shouted. Faith ran out crying. Please sir, he was just hungry. Thomas slapped Frank hard across the face. The sound echoed. Frank's cheek turned red, but he didn't cry. He just looked at Thomas. His eyes were calm and unafraid. This made Thomas even angrier. You are the son of a useless woman, Thomas yelled. You will never be anything. The crowd stayed silent. Nobody defended Frank. Faith tried to pull her son away, but Thomas pushed her to the ground. Frank clenched his fist. But he was too small to fight back. Thomas laughed loudly. Look at him. He thinks he's strong. But deep inside, Thomas felt strange. The boy's fearless eyes disturbed him. It was a look he would never forget. A few days later, a big car drove into the compound. A rich man stepped out. His name was Mr. Daniels. He was Thomas's uncle. Everyone gathered to greet him. Thomas smiled and acted kind again. Welcome, uncle. My home is your home. Mr. Daniels looked around. He saw Faith and Frank standing quietly in the corner. Who are they? He asked. Thomas put his arm around Mr. Daniels. Just tenants. I help the poor, uncle. You know me. Mr. Daniels smiled. You're a good man, Thomas. Faith's heart jumped with hope. Maybe this rich man would help them. Maybe he would speak to Thomas. She stepped forward shyly. Sir, please, but Mr. Daniels didn't even look at her. He walked into Thomas's house. They ate and laughed inside. Hours later, Mr. Daniels left. Faith watched the car drive away. Her hope died. Frank held her hand. It's okay, Mama. We don't need them. One afternoon, Frank went to fetch water from the compound well. He carried a clay pot on his head. It was heavy. Other children pushed past him, laughing and playing. Frank tried to steady the pot. But someone bumped into him hard. The pot fell and shattered into pieces. Water spilled everywhere. Frank froze. His heart pounded. He knew what was coming. Thomas heard the crash. He stormed out of his house. "Who broke that pot?" he roared. Frank stepped forward. "It was an accident, sir." Thomas didn't care. He grabbed a thick stick. "You useless boy." He began to beat Frank. The stick landed on Frank's back, his arms, his legs. Frank fell to the ground. He tried to protect his head. Faith screamed and ran to cover her son. But Thomas pushed her aside. He kept beating Frank until he was too tired to continue. Frank lay on the ground, barely moving. Blood dripped from his nose. Faith dragged Frank into their small room. She cried as she cleaned his wounds with a torn cloth. Frank's body was covered in bruises. He could barely open his eyes. But he didn't cry. Faith held him close. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "My son, you will rise above this place. I promise you. One day, you will be greater than all of them." Frank heard her words. Even through the pain, he believed her. That night, Faith couldn't sleep. She prayed silently for hours. Outside, Thomas sat on his veranda drinking palm wine. He was talking to another tenant. "I'll throw that widow and her son out soon," he said loudly. "They are a waste of space." Frank overheard everything. His small hands clenched into fists. He made a silent promise to himself. One day, Thomas would regret this. One day, he would see who Frank really was. Faith knew they were in danger. Thomas would throw them out any day now. She had to save her son. Late one night, she woke Frank up. "You must leave," she whispered. Frank didn't understand. "Leave? Where, Mama?" Faith explained that her distant uncle lived in another town. He was poor but kind. "You will go there. You will study. You will survive." Frank shook his head. "I can't leave you, Mama." But Faith was firm. "You must. If you stay here, Thomas will destroy you." She packed his few clothes in a small bag. Before sunrise, she walked Frank to the road. She hugged him tightly. Tears rolled down her face. "Be strong, my son. Make me proud." Frank left with a heavy heart. Faith returned to the compound alone. The next morning, Thomas kicked open her door. The room was empty. Frank was gone. Thomas laughed cruelly. "Your only hope has run away." Thomas mocked Faith every single day. "Where is your smart son now?" he would shout. Faith said nothing. She just worked and prayed. Deep inside, she was happy. Her son was safe. That was all that mattered. But her body was growing weaker. She had no food. No rest. No medicine. Thomas didn't care. He even took the few items she owned. "You owe me rent," he said. Faith didn't fight him. She just watched silently. Meanwhile, far away, Frank lived with his uncle. Life was hard there too. His uncle was a fisherman. Frank helped him every day. But at night, Frank studied under a dim lamp. He read old books. He solved math problems on scraps of paper. He never forgot his mother's words. He never forgot Thomas's cruelty. Frank's heart burned with one mission: to become someone great. Someone who could stand tall. Someone who could help the helpless. Months passed. Faith's health got worse. She coughed constantly. She could barely stand. One night, she collapsed in her room. Nobody came to help her. Thomas heard her coughing but didn't care. By morning, Faith was gone. She died quietly, alone, on a thin mat. When the other tenants found her, they told Thomas. He shrugged. "Remove her body. And take everything she left behind." There was nothing left to take. Just an old wrapper and a wooden comb. Thomas kept them anyway. A few neighbors whispered prayers, but nobody dared to cry loudly. Faith was buried in an unmarked grave. Far away, Frank suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. He didn't know why. He sat down and stared at the sky. Somehow, he knew. His mother was gone. He wept alone by the river. His tears mixed with the water. But he didn't break. He kept going. Years passed. Frank grew into a strong young man. He worked during the day and studied at night. His uncle supported him as much as he could. Frank was brilliant. Teachers noticed him. One of them helped him get a scholarship. Frank studied medicine. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. But he never gave up. He remembered his mother's faith. He remembered Thomas's cruelty. Those memories pushed him forward. Frank graduated top of his class. He became a doctor. Not just any doctor, a specialist in heart surgery. He was known for his skill and his kindness. He treated poor patients for free. He smiled at everyone. But deep inside, Frank carried the past like a scar. One day, the hospital received an emergency call. A powerful man was dying. His name was announced over the speaker. Frank froze when he heard it. Thomas. Frank stood still in the hospital corridor. Nurses rushed past him. The name echoed in his mind. Thomas. The same man who beat him. The same man who killed his mother with cruelty. The same man who laughed at their suffering. Frank's hands trembled. His supervisor called him. Dr. Frank, we need you. This is a VIP patient. Very important. Frank nodded slowly. He walked toward the emergency wing. His heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't afraid. He was remembering. Remembering everything. He reached the door and paused. He took a deep breath. Then he pushed the door open. Inside, Thomas lay on the bed. His face was pale. His breathing was shallow. Machines beeped loudly around him. Doctors crowded the room. One of them turned to Frank. Thank God you're here. He's dying. Only you can save him. Frank stared at the man on the bed. Their eyes met. Thomas had fallen from grace. His wealth was gone. Bad business deals destroyed him. Then sickness came. His heart was failing. Nobody wanted to help him. The people he once ruled now ignored him. Thomas was alone. He was rushed to the city hospital in desperation. His servants barely cared anymore. Now he lay helpless, surrounded by strangers. Thomas had always believed he was untouchable. But the mighty had fallen. The nurses checked his pulse. It was weak. His breathing was uneven. We need the specialist now, one doctor said urgently. They called for Frank. When Thomas heard footsteps approaching, he tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came. He was too weak. His eyes searched the faces around him. Then he saw a young man in a white coat. The man stood at the foot of the bed. Something about him looked familiar. But Thomas couldn't remember. His mind was fading. He just wanted to leave. Frank walked closer to the bed. His face was calm, but his heart was a storm. He looked down at Thomas. The man looked so small now. So weak. So different from the giant Frank once feared. Frank's eyes moved to Thomas's right hand. There it was, a deep scar across the knuckles. Frank remembered that scar. Thomas had gotten it years ago while beating a tenant with a metal rod. Frank had watched it happen. He had been too afraid to move. Now, that same hand lay limp and trembling. Thomas's eyes flickered toward Frank. He tried to focus. Who was this doctor? Why did he look so serious? Frank said nothing. He just stared. The other doctors waited for his instruction. "Dr. Frank, what do we do?" one of them asked. Frank didn't answer immediately. His mind was filled with memories. His mother's tears. The beatings. The hunger. The fear. The death. Another doctor stepped forward confidently. His name was Dr. Williams. "I can handle this case," he said. "It's a simple procedure. Just stabilize him and operate." The senior nurse looked relieved. "Good. Let's proceed immediately." They prepared Thomas for surgery. Frank stepped back silently. He watched as they moved Thomas to the operating room. Dr. Williams smiled. "Don't worry, Mr. Thomas. You'll be fine." Thomas felt a wave of relief. Maybe he would survive after all. Maybe this nightmare would end. But 30 minutes into surgery, alarms began to sound. Something was wrong. Thomas's heart rate dropped dangerously. Dr. Williams panicked. "His heart is failing. I can't control it." Nurses rushed around. Machines beeped frantically. Dr. Williams tried everything, but nothing worked. Finally, he stepped back, sweating. "I can't do it. We need the specialist." Everyone turned toward Frank. He was standing outside the operating room, watching through the glass. The head surgeon approached Frank urgently. "Dr. Frank, you're the only one who can do this. His heart is too damaged. If you don't operate now, he'll die in minutes." Frank looked through the glass. Thomas was unconscious on the table. Machines kept him barely alive. Nurses stared at Frank, waiting. Frank felt the weight of the moment. He had dreamed of this. The man who destroyed his childhood was now completely at his mercy. One word from Frank, and Thomas would die. Nobody would blame him. It would just be a failed surgery. Frank's hands curled into fists. He remembered his mother's face. He remembered her last words, "You will rise above this place." Did rising mean revenge? Or did it mean something else? The surgeon spoke again. "Dr. Frank, please. We are losing him." Frank closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. Then he made his decision. Frank turned to the head surgeon. "Prepare the operating room again." "I'll do it." Relief washed over everyone's faces. Nurses rushed to set up. Frank walked into the scrub room. He washed his hands slowly, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He whispered to himself, "This is not for him. This is for her." He meant his mother. He walked into the operating room. Thomas lay there, helpless. Frank stood over him. For a moment, their eyes met. Thomas was barely conscious, but he saw Frank clearly now. Something in Frank's face triggered a memory. A distant, buried memory. Thomas's lips moved weakly. He whispered, "Who are you?" Frank leaned closer. His voice was calm but cold. "Do you remember a widow? A woman you treated like garbage?" Thomas's eyes widened slightly. His breath quickened. "Do you remember her son? A small boy you beat and humiliated?" Frank paused. "That boy is standing over you now." Thomas's face went pale. His heart monitor beeped faster. Fear flooded his eyes. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Memories rushed back. The widow. The boy. The beatings. The cruelty. He remembered it all now. Frank continued, his voice steady. "You called me useless. You said I would never be anything." Thomas's lips trembled. Tears rolled down his face. He wanted to beg. He wanted to apologize. But his body was too weak. Frank watched him silently. The nurses stood frozen, unsure what to do. Then the heart monitor began to beep wildly. Thomas's heart was failing again. "Dr. Frank," a nurse shouted. Frank snapped back to reality. He looked at the monitor. Thomas was dying. Right now. Right in front of him. Frank had seconds to decide. Let him die. Or save him. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, "Be better than them, my son." Frank's hands moved quickly. "Scalpel," he said firmly. The nurse handed it to him. Frank began the surgery. His hands were steady. His mind was focused. He worked with precision and skill. Minutes felt like hours. The team watched in awe. Frank repaired Thomas's damaged heart with perfect technique. He didn't hesitate. He didn't falter. Finally, the heart monitor stabilized. Thomas's breathing became steady. The surgery was a success. The nurses clapped quietly. "You did it, Dr. Frank," one of them said. Frank stepped back. He looked at Thomas lying there, alive. Alive because of him. Frank pulled off his gloves slowly. He felt no joy. No anger. Just emptiness. He had saved the man who killed his mother. He had saved the man who tried to destroy him. But he did it anyway. Because that's who he chose to be. He walked out of the room without looking back. Thomas woke up hours later. His chest hurt, but he was alive. A nurse smiled at him. "You're very lucky. Dr. Frank saved your life." Thomas closed his eyes. Shame washed over him like a flood. He remembered everything Frank said. He remembered everything he did. For years, Thomas thought he was powerful. He thought he was important. But now, he realized the truth. He was nothing. And the boy he tried to destroy had become everything. Days passed. Thomas recovered slowly. But he was a different man now. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. Guilt crushed him. One evening, Frank came to check on him. Thomas grabbed his hand weakly. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Please, forgive me." Frank looked at him for a long moment. Then he gently pulled his hand away. "I didn't save you for your sake," Frank said quietly. "I saved you for mine." Then he walked out. Thomas was discharged a week later. He had no money. No home. No friends. He returned to his old compound, but it was sold. Everything was gone. He became a beggar. The same people who once feared him now ignored him. Thomas wandered the streets, broken and forgotten. One day, he sat under a tree, hungry and tired. A young woman walked by. She stopped and gave him food. "God bless you," Thomas said weakly. The woman smiled. "My husband taught me to help everyone. Even those who don't deserve it." She walked away. Thomas stared at the food. Tears filled his eyes. He finally understood. Mercy was not weakness. Cruelty was not strength. He had wasted his life hurting others. And the one person he hurt the most had saved him. Thomas wept under that tree. He wept for the widow. He wept for Frank. He wept for himself. But it was too late. The damage was done. Frank became one of the most respected doctors in the country. He built a hospital in his mother's name. It treated poor patients for free. People called him a hero. But Frank never forgot where he came from. He never forgot his mother's strength. He never forgot Thomas's cruelty. One evening, Frank stood in his office, looking at his mother's picture on the wall. He whispered, "I did it, Mama. I rose above them all." Then he smiled sadly. He thought about Thomas. The man was still alive, somewhere, living with his regret. Frank had given him life. But he couldn't give him peace. That was Thomas's burden to carry. Frank closed his eyes and whispered the lesson he learned, if only he knew. If only he knew that cruelty plants seeds that grow beyond our control. If only he knew that the boy he tried to break would become the man who saved him. Power without compassion will always kneel before mercy. That was the truth. And Frank lived it every single day. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. If so, please like the video, comment on what you have learned from the video, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel.